made his way over to Kamihina, the center of Hitogata. A stone staircase ran up the mountain leading to the shrine. Inui took out his pocket watch. It was past 3 p.m. He knew forensics would probably arrive by the time he got back from the shrine. Since the local precinct was at the foot of the mountain, first responders were always slow to arrive. Inui had stationed himself nearby precisely to circumvent such issues, but didn't appear to have helped much in the end. And so he started his trek up the stairs. Inui stretched out once he'd completed the 10-minute ascent to the shrine. Though he was fit enough to not get winded by the walk, it didn't change the fact that his age was catching up with him. Even a statement such as that was proof he was getting up there in the years. Inui entertained those thoughts as he headed toward the shrine office. Upon his arrival, he called out from the outside. Shortly thereafter, he heard footsteps approaching from the back of the building, kicking snow aside. Inui didn't recognize this man.
富山県警察部の乾です。あなたは？
私は当神社のネギを務めております。
昨晩の祭りについていくつか聞かせていただいても構いませんかな？
祭りのことですか？
Kensei's face warped in surprise. He'd probably expected Inui to inquire about the murder.
あまりお話しできることもありませんが、それでもよろしいのでしたら。
It wasn't what he'd been hoping to hear, but Inui nodded nonetheless. He'd have to make do if he didn't want them to simply turn him away at the door. Inui entered a wooden-floored room and sat down.
そちゃですが。
お構いなく。
Inui cradled the teacup he'd been served. Warmed his chilled hands perfectly.
祭りのことをお調べに来たのです。
Ultimately, it was Kensei who started the conversation.
無論違います。私は刑事課の人間ですから、調べるのは事件についてです。
I'm a criminal investigator. I investigate crimes. Stupid.
でしょうね。
昨晩の祭りについて尋ねたいのは事実です。巫女による託戦があったそうですが、
どこでそれを
この集落について調べていれば、おのずと明らかになることです。
そうですか。
Kensei nodded. He made no attempt to hide the mortified look upon his visage.
それで、託戦の結果はどうなのですか？
Kensei shook his head.
答えることはできません。
Inui glared at Kensei.
勘違いしないでいただきたいのは、私がそれを隠しているわけではないということです。
ほ
う。ご神託は、巫女しかその意味を理解できないとされています。
なるほど。
Inui nodded.
では、その巫女に合わせていただけませんかな？
それはできません。
Kensei immediately shot Inui down.
なぜですかな？
巫女は侵されざるものです。
A new voice chimed in. Came from a woman garbed in priestess robes who just entered the room. Namely, Saya Shigasa.
たとえ警察の方であろうと。
監禁罪などで捜査することも可能ですが。
どうぞご随意に。祭りが終わり、巫女がここにとどまる理由もありませぬゆえ。
ほほ
う。ほほ。Wonderful. Just my luck. Naturally, Inui couldn't have a search warrant issued if there wasn't even any proof that said individual actually existed.
それはおいおいさせていただきますよ。今はこの集落で起きている事件を調べることの方が。
川瀬さ
ん、よくご存知で。
氏子ですから。
Inui scrutinized Kensei's countenance. He was hanging his head and looked depressed, yet expressed no further emotion.
では、ヒンナ様のたたりと呼ばれていることもご存知ですな。
ええ。
Saya answered in Kensei's stead.
それについてはどうお考えですか？
Inui closely observed Kensei as he pressed Saya.
どうもこうも、その通りの意味で捉えておりますよ。
その通りの意味とは、たたりが起こったと考えておられるのですな。
ええ、もちろん。
Saya's composure wasn't rattled in the slightest. Meanwhile, Kensei didn't show much of a reaction.
もちろん。こちらから喧伝したことは一切ございませんが。
でしょうな。
The idea of the curse was so deeply ingrained in Hitogata that they didn't even need to resort to such tactics. Any bizarre corpse that turned up was attributed to the work of the curse, with or without one of those clay dolls present. Inui hadn't brought the one he discovered in the victim's abdomen. There was no way he'd just go around showing off his trump card like that.
昨晩はどちらにいらっしゃいましたかな？
Inui interrogated Kensei and Saya. He knew it was a pointless question. Still, at least it spelled out to the Shigasas that he had his eye on them.
祭りの片付けとその後はささやかな酒宴を開きました。
身内の宴ですから当然何の証明にもならないのでしょうけれど。
構いませんよ、別。
Inui got up.
ではまたいずれお尋ねすることもあるかもしれませんが、その時はよろしくお願いします。
Inui ruminated over the facts as he made his way back to the settlement. He needed the Oracle's testimony. Thus, he'd probably have to stay in this settlement for a little while longer, unfortunately. Then again, he was prepared for that possibility every single year. Besides, he'd already waited this long, so a little more wouldn't kill him. Or would it? Is that supposed to be a little tongue-in-cheek statement? It's like, it's not gonna kill me to stay in this village much longer, and he's gonna end up getting fucking killed. That evening, investigators arrived from the precinct at the foot of the mountain and began combing the Kawase residence. Karen watched them from a distance alongside a crowd of fellow villagers.
ナナコさんが第一発見者らしいわよ。
Megari broke the silence from her spot next to Karen.
そうなのです。駐在所に行くのを見たって若女将が。
Megari pointed to Yu, who was flanking Karen's other side.
町から来たらしい刑事さんと話しているのを見ただけよ。
何を話してたかはわからないの？
わからないわよ、そりゃ。うちのおばあちゃんはタタリだって言ってたけど。
タタリですか？
You mean the curse? I don't know, how many other curses do y'all talk about on the regular? It was a traditional folk legend here and there in Hitogata. Karen herself had been told it more times than she could count. Same likely went for Megari and Yu. According to what Karen had heard, this so-called curse had only happened once in her lifetime, shortly after she and Ayato were born. Thus it didn't feel real. That was why she and her friends were the least bit reluctant to gossip about it.
タタリってことはやっぱりミコのお告げなのかな？どうなのでしょうね。
Karen thought back to the Oracle's ceremonial dance the night before. However, she didn't have the slightest idea what it signified.
でもタタリだったら偽物のヒンナ様を祀った罰なのでしょ？
偽物のヒンナ様ね。私だって見たことないわよ。
The real Lord Hina was enshrined at the Hinagami estate. But since Karen didn't know what separated the counterfeit from the genuine article, she'd likely never noticed if it was swapped out. Would something like that count as worshipping a fake then?
この前私が作った土人形、あれも偽物のヒンナ様よね。
でもあれはきちんと神社で作ったのだし、それにお祭りの時に巫女が杯の中に崩していたでしょ。
お祭りで使うと言われていましたからね。隠れてヒンナ様を祀っていたってことは。
そうなのかもしれないわね。
But if the real Lord Hina grants wishes, then why won't he grant mine? The thought crossed Karen's mind as she listened to Megari and Yu converse. Because your wish is fucking weird. That's why. Several days had passed since the festival. Naori and his friends all gathered in the secret base for the first time in ages. I'm like, why is there cum all over the floor? Guys, what are these weird stains all over the floor? What's this syrup doing on the floor?
ナオちゃん、あれから何か分かったのかい？
Aito was asking about the incident that had taken the settlement by storm.
さあね。いろいろと調べているみたいだけど、おまわりさんに聞いてもダメなのかい？あの人も何も知らされていないようだね。
Aito had indeed tried casually prodding Takayama on the progress of the investigation, only to leave empty-handed. Probably because the prefectural police officers making themselves at home in Hitogata considered Takayama a local first and a cop second.
なんか嫌だよね。
Megari grumbled.
ずっと見張られているような気がして落ち着きません。
うちは余計に見張られているようだからね。
ひな神だから。
そのようですね。
でもうちよりも。
Aito glanced at the corner of the room. Satsuki was there, toasting rice crackers at the brazier.
神社は大変そうだな。
はい。
Satsuki cocked her head.
よく出てこられたね、さっちゃん。警察の人がいなかった？
裏を通ってきたからわかりません。
I'm surprised you're still here too. Like, I thought like after the incident, like, I don't know if they'd like lock you away or send you away. I don't. Maybe that'd be too suspicious, right? In the wake of a murder, that's why they're keeping you around. Like, oh, actually, yeah, we had someone just leave right after the murder happened. Don't look into that. So I guess, I mean, I see how that'd be, raise some suspicions. But also, I didn't realize you were still sticking around.
裏山の中かい？
ええ、祠の前を通ってこの近くに抜けられるんです。
よくその格好で歩けたわね。
少しだけ濡れちゃいましたけど。
Satsuki grinned bashfully.
ここに集まっていることが警察に知られたら。
Indeed, it was a rather delicate situation.
なんで？僕たちは関係ないじゃないか。
関係ないのを知っているのは俺たち自身だけだろ。
私たちが疑われるってこと？
よからぬことを企んでいるんじゃないか。
何も企んじゃいないわよ。
そう思われるって話だよ。まあ、あのおじさんたちに疑われるのは面倒だな。
Inspector with serpentine eyes had been spotted around Hitogata came to Naori's mind.
ここに集まるのは
隠れ家がなくなっちゃうのは嫌だものね。
Everyone else nodded, apart from Satsuki, who anxiously regarded her new friends instead.
皆さんここにはもう
一時的にだよ。警察がいなくなればまた集まれるさ。
そうですか。
別にここじゃなければ会えないというわけじゃないからね。
Naori tried comforting a gloomy Satsuki.
そうですよね。
Inui stoically reviewed reports at the police station's work desk.
お茶入れましょうか。
Labor Takayama stood around like a soulless golem.
勝手にしてくれ。
Inui brushed him aside with an apathetic remark that could have been taken either way. You got time to make tea, then go out on patrol. Couldn't even be bothered to tell Takayama that. Forensics officers and the like performed their own investigations into Sachiko Kawase's homicide, and yet failed to turn up anything particularly noteworthy. Their findings had been more or less the same as what Yuzuru Kuroya had deduced at the scene of the crime. Nothing belonging to the murder had been found. However, that itself was proof that the culprit had been very well prepared. As such, that meant it had to have been a premeditated murder. And again, just about anyone could have figured as much simply by seeing the state of the body. To make matters worse, the thread used to stitch up the corpse and the rope that suspended it were off-the-shelf goods no one could buy were off-the-shelf goods one could buy just about anywhere. In other words, identifying the culprit via that route would prove impossible. Just as Inui had suspected, the only real lead was the clay doll found in the victim's abdomen. Though soaked with Sachiko Kawase's blood, the thing had clearly been kneaded by human hands. Unfortunately, they hadn't been able to lift any fingerprints off of it. If this truly was the curse of Lord Hina that the villagers spoke of, then that clay doll was a fake Lord Hina. However, that raised the question of who exactly had made it. Had it been Sachiko Kawase herself, then that would turn this killing into an instance of the curse, just as the legend said. But were in fact someone else entirely, that person could possibly have disguised their murder as the work of the curse.
お茶入りました。
Inui ignored the teacup Takayama set on the desk and addressed the younger man instead.
第一発見者の看護婦は祭りに関わっていなかったのかね。
はい、調書によればそうですね。
身内のものではないだろうな。
父親とその客人の証言です。
そうか。
Suspecting the one who found the body was par for the course when it came to homicide investigations. However, Nanako Sawashiro's ties to the curse were weak. Her employer had formerly been a Hinagami, but that was it. Still, Inui couldn't help but wonder if asking Yuzuru Kuroya to examine the body had really been the right choice. Is the connection just a coincidence? Just how much is happenstance, and how much is by design? It was difficult to draw that line. He couldn't just jump to conclusions and assume it was all one interconnected plot. Much as he wanted to believe it was, it didn't mean he could afford to discard all other possibilities later. Tying everything together like the reports before him was impossible, for now anyway. Making that happen would require one last ingredient.
Miko ka.
If he knew he could just prove she existed, if he could make her the cornerstone to this case, then he believed he could unravel the mysteries behind that so-called curse. Chizuru sat in the living room by her lonesome, drinking tea. Things had gotten awkward around the house since the other day. Oh, you mean that day when you forced your brother to do that? Yeah, I imagine things would be a bit awkward. Starting with Nanako, everyone, even Yuzuru and So, had found themselves with remarkably little to say to one another. Or are you just talking about the murder in general? Chizuru wondered if she was partly to blame for that. After all, she was the one who initially disrupted the status quo, even before the murder. Right. Fumi had barely said a word to her since that one day. Understandable. And yet, he'd silently accompanied her to the festival, all the while still recovering from his injuries. It's all my fault. There's nothing I can do to make up for crushing his dreams. What? You thought graping him would solve his problems? Like, what the fuck? I know what will take your mind off of that injury you've got there. What if I took advantage of you? Like, god damn. Don't act like you were trying to fucking help him. You were acting on your own selfish desires, you freaky little bitch. Nothing at all. Chizuru clenched her thighs. She couldn't help but remember that night. Freaky little shit. Chizuru hadn't considered that an act of penance. Not in the slightest. Good. It definitely wasn't. She done it simply because she wanted to. As long as you acknowledge that. As long as you're not sitting here trying to fucking tell me that you were doing that to help him. But even then, you're like, I can't do anything to help him at all. What have you tried? What have you tried to help him? You like, yeah, there was the incident, and then there was your selfish act, and it's like, you keep saying there's nothing I can do to help him. You're not trying anything. You're just molesting the guy. Chizuru drooped across the table. She reached for her skirt and then... Chizuru jolted at the sound of So's voice.
なんだ具合でも悪いのか
She managed to squeak out a reply despite the panic rattling her.
口から手紙が来ていたぞ
家からですか?
What could this be about? Chizuru read the letter So handed her.
帰ってきなさい.
It was her father's handwriting.
どうやらこちらでいろいろあって心配しているようだな
That made sense. It was only natural to be concerned about his children, what with Fumiya's injuries and that murder.
帰りのハイヤーと記者の手配はこちらでしておくよ
はい、ありがとうございます。
Chizuru returned to her room.
あら?
The window was open, cold air streaming in from the outside. Did I forget to lock it or something? Puzzled, Chizuru approached the window, only to notice snow stuck to the windowsill. Chizuru leaned through and looked outside. When she did, she caught sight of a trail of footprints engraved into the snow. Chizuru gasped and backed away. Did someone break in? She quickly took stock of her surroundings. Just as she was beginning to think there were no signs the room had been ransacked, she spotted the camera on the desk.
どうして?
Okay, because she had been taking pictures of the festival, so and surely someone had noticed that, right? So one of the festival workers had planned to sneak in when they could and take it, because, ooh, there could be potential evidence that the cops might find there. The back cover was open. Okay, they didn't take the camera, but they took the film out of it. Chizuru frantically checked it.
ない.
There was an empty space where a roll of film should have been. Chizuru opened her bag over by the nearby bed. Her spent rolls of film were still in their case. The rest of her belongings were all there too. Someone broke in and stole the film and my camera. But who would do that and why? Chizuru sat on her bed. Her mind was such a jumbled mess that she had no idea what to do. Should I tell someone? No, I can't cause more trouble than I already have. Fortunately, she just replaced the film, so the roll that had been stolen was completely blank. I kind of figured that was going to be the case when she mentioned, like, oh, hey, my pile of spent film rolls. I'm like, oh, so let me guess you had just replaced it at the end of the night? Yeah. Chizuru approached the window again and wiped the snow off the windowsill. Once that was done, she closed the window and locked it tight. She pretended she hadn't noticed and it'd be like nothing had ever happened. There's no need for her to rock the boat. What she wanted was to spend her remaining few days here in peace. Satsuki sat curled up in a corner of the room. She'd been spending her time like this since that day. Rarely did she move to do anything besides eat the food she was served. She simply looked at the mirror from time to time and sighed. Ah, the doll's back.
どうしたの？
Her lips fluttered.
別に何もないわ。
Satsuki looked away from the doll.
少々疲れてしまっただけ。そう。
The doll's head drooped.
あなたはいいわね。
Satsuki reached for the doll.
私はあなたのような強さを持ちたかった。
What strength does a doll have? She proceeded to grip the doll's head tightly. Oh?
ねえ教えて。どうして見ていただけの私が手を下したあなたよりもずっとめいってしまっているのかしら。
Okay, so that's just lending credence to the whole schizophrenia thing that they thought she had developed. Either schizophrenia or some form of multiple personality disorder. She's like, I'm not the one who killed them, it was the doll. The doll killed them. I see. No response.
私はあなたになりたかった。あなたの強さが欲しかった。それなのにどうしてあなたは私から全てを奪ってしまうの？
She squeezed the doll. Satsuki could do little more than hang her head. Ah. Yikes.
それでは短い間でしたがお世話になりました。
Fumiya bowed once the taxi pulled up to the settlement.
お世話になりました。
Chizuru followed suit.
またいつでも来なさい。不便で何もないところだがね。
いえ、ありがとうございました。
直りも挨拶くらいしなさい。
ああ、
I reluctantly took a step toward the siblings.
また今度。
お世話になりました。
Two boys bowed to one another. Though they'd spent several months living together, Naori hadn't spoken much to his cousins in that time. Therefore, he wasn't particularly torn up about them leaving. Just then, the rear door of the black car opened up.
それでは。
The vehicle drove off once the siblings got inside.
慌ただしかったな。
そりゃこれだけ面倒が起こってしまってはな。たとえ東京の情勢が芳しくなくても呼び戻すだろうよ。
しかし、
Naori glanced at the police station behind him.
よく出ていくことを警察が許したな。
That's what I was gonna say, actually. Like, just still not gonna have any questions for them. Like, I'm guessing no one really paid attention to Chizuru snapping pictures then. I just feel like that would have been brought up. Like, oh yeah, there was a young girl snapping pictures at the festival, right? Like, oh, pictures.
無関係だからだろうさ。どうも連中は星を絞ってきているみたいだからな。
I mean, I get that.
その割には捜査員も減らしたじゃないか。
They even have anyone standing guard of the Kawase residence anymore. If it weren't for the keep out sign outside, no one would have taken the place as the site of a gruesome incident.
目星がつけば大人数いても邪魔なだけだよ。
So turned around.
じゃあわしは帰るからな。お前も隠れ家なんかで遊んでちゃとっ捕まるぞ。
わかってるよ。
So he found out. Didn't see that coming. Nah, but So's chill like that. He needs to lay off the groping, but, you know, he's chill like that. Nobody's perfect. You know, if that's his one little flaw, that's that occasionally he likes to grab ass. It's like, you know, that's not okay. But if that's the worst thing he does, hey, I think So's pretty chill. After he and his grandfather parted ways, Naori returned to the Kamihina, where he found Ayato and Satsuki in front of the staircase to the shrine.
Yo, お二人さん。
あ、なおちゃん、親戚はもう帰ったのかい？
今しがたな。
いろいろあったからね。
出ていけるんだったら、その。
なおちゃんだって医者になるんだったらそのうち勉強しに出ていくんだろ？
Naori furrowed his brow.
そうだな。さすがにここからじゃ医学部に通えないからな。
I go to the nearest city? Will I go all the way to Tokyo? Though Naori wasn't sure yet, he intended to come to a decision soon.
リヒトはどうなんだ？絵の勉強とかしたいんじゃないのか？
僕はどうだろうね。
Ayato smiled indecisively.
誰も許してくれないと思うから。
Ayato was destined to succeed the Hinagami family. Therefore, he'd likely get involved with running their pharmaceutical company whether he liked it or not. Though the scale was different, he and Naori were practically in the same boat.
さっちゃんはどうなんだい？
Yes, Sadie. Naori turned the conversation over to Satsuki.
何がでしょうか？
将来のことさ。さっちゃんだって何かやってみたいこととかあるだろ？
私はわかりません。
Satsuki hung her head.
そういうことあまり考えたことなかったから。
大抵はそうだよ。僕だって結局どうするかあまり考えていないんだから。
Ayato comforted Satsuki.
あ、そうだ、なおちゃん。
なんだ？
例の家見に行かないか？
例の。ああ、事件があった家か。
Guys, the keep out sign.
もう捜査も終わって誰もいないんだろ？
Ayato was wrapped with curiosity. Why?
そうらしいけどな。さすがに趣味が悪いんじゃないのか。
What? Maybe it's just me, but like, what kind of fucking kid is just like, yo, grisly murder scene? There's no one saying we can't be there. It's just a keep out sign. I say we go check it out. Like, I'm sure there's some kids like that, but like, goddamn. Gruesome murder happens, just absolutely gruesome shit. Then you're like, yo, let's go check that shit out. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you, Ayato? For the longest time, you were like the chillest one here. You're just a chill dude. You didn't really know what your future had in store for you. You're just kind of going with the flow. I respected it. But I was just like, hey. Out of nowhere, it's like, hey, you want to go check out the murder house? But I imagine that's not going to sit too well with Sadie. It was the site of a murder, after all.
こういうことなんてめったにないだろ？
The fuck does that matter? Guys, murder never happens around here. Of course we gotta go look at the crime scene. That's stupid. You're stupid.
そう頻繁に会ってたまるかよ。さっちゃんだって嫌がってるんじゃないか？
Yeah, think about Sadie.
私は別に。
Really? Is it just because it's Ayato? Satsuki denied it, but she quite clearly had qualms about the plan.
大丈夫だよ。とっくに片付けられているだろうし、何の問題もないって。
そうですか。
Now he was tempted to ask Ayato why they should even bother going if the place had been cleared out, but he ultimately held his tongue. Ayato probably wouldn't have had an answer for him even if he did voice the question after all. The boy was simply curious, nothing more, nothing less. Even still, like, there's sometimes you just kind of need to keep your curiosity in check. Like, oh, I wonder what that crime scene looks like, but also I have the common sense to not go barging in on a crime scene, regardless of whether it's been cleaned up or not. There's this vacant house because its resident died. Let's go peep it. Like, no. The three of them headed toward the Kawase residence in Mikihina. The surrounding snow had been cleared entirely, probably the investigators doing. A rope with a keep out sign was strung prominently across the area. However, there was no one standing watch. As such, Ayato promptly strode over the rope and ventured onward.
あまり荒らすなよ。
Naori warned Ayato before raising the rope for Satsuki.
ありがとうございます。
Satsuki passed on through. Before them was the front door and a nameplate reading Kawase. Ayato reached for the door.
おい、そこに書いてある文字が読めないのか？
Get there, asked Inui. Voice suddenly accosted the group from behind. Naoto turned around to find the middle-aged inspector who'd been hanging around Hitogata recently standing there. His name was Inui, if memory served.
聞いてないのか？
あ、すみません。
Naoto sincerely apologized and seized Ayato and Satsuki by their sleeves. Ayato looked disappointed while Satsuki seemed relieved.
最近のガキは恐れってものがないのかね。
Inui grumbled as he approached the three of them.
もう全部片付けたんですよね。
当然だ。遺体も司法解剖に回し。
だったら少しくらい中を。
坊主、それは住居侵入罪と言ってな。
True.
立派な犯罪だ。
Ayato shut up after Inui reprimanded him.
君は確かひな神の子だな。
Ayato snapped to attention upon hearing those words.
あ、
この程度で告げ口するほど暇ではない。
よかった。
Ayato heaved a sigh of relief.
その代わり、いくつか尋ねたいことがあるのだが構わないかね。
はい。
Naoto was impressed that Inui had managed to present Ayato with an offer he couldn't refuse.
君たちは祭りの日に何をしていた？
Inui scrutinized the group.
俺もです。
答えたくないのならばそれでも構わんよ。
However, Naoto didn't think that sounded like an option.
普通にみんなで神社の境内に
Ayato started explaining just as Naoto was puzzling over what to tell Inui.
何か変わったことは？
何もありませんでした。
Naoto answered first this time.
いつもと違うのはミコが踊っていたくらいかな。
But then Ayato went and ruined everything with that thoughtless comment.
ミコか。
何ですか？
Naoto unconsciously took a step forward to shield Satsuki after surmising Inui knew what the oracle was.
そういや、君たちが何者なのか聞いていなかったね。
Inui took out his notebook.
君はひな神の子だったね。
He started with Ayato, likely because he was an easier nut to crack than Naori.
ひな神綾人です。
Ayato answered honestly. He was probably driven by the fear that Inui would report him to his father.
そちらのお嬢さん。
私は仕草さつきと申します。
Satsuki bowed her head.
神社と何か関係があるのですか？戸籍には記載されていないはずですが。
彼女は仕草家の親戚ですよ。しばらく前からこちらに滞在しているんです。
Naoto extended Satsuki a helping hand.
お住まいはどちらですかな？
東京の四谷区です。
ご両親のお名前は？
父は仕草光雄、母は涼子と言います。
Satsuki answered without the slightest hesitation. That was all news to Naori.
嘘をついても調べればすぐにわかることですよ。
Inui scribbled this information into his notebook.
嘘ではありません。どうぞ調べてもらっても構いませんよ。
そうですか。では君は祭りの時どこにいたのかね？
僕と一緒にいました。ミコが踊っている時もです。
Ayato chimed in before Satsuki could answer.
本当かね？
もちろんです。他にも一緒にいるのを見ている人は。
Suddenly, Naoto cut himself short. Shizuto was the one who had taken that photograph. However, she brought the camera home with her.
写真もあるのか？
うちに滞在していたいとこが撮りました。あいにく先ほど東京に帰ったばかりですけど。
Inui snorted, showing no indicators as to whether he was satisfied with the explanation or not.
さつきさんだったか。もう一つ聞かせて
Yeah.
くれ。
Where were you after the festival?
何でしょうか？
君はミコのことをどのくらい知っているのかね？
Inui went straight for the kill. His serpentine eyes were trained on Satsuki. It was clear he was determined not to miss even the slightest of twitches from her.
よくわからないのです。
わからないとは。
あの装束を身にまとっている方を誰も知らないとおっしゃっていました。
どういう意味だね？
Satsuki shook her head.
そこまではよくわかりません。詳しくは他の方にお尋ねください。
Inui pocketed his notebook as though her answer had satisfied him. Rather, he'd probably realized he'd never get anywhere.
もういいでしょ。
Even so, Naoto cut between the two and tried to bring an end to this interrogation.
君にも尋ねることがあったよ。黒谷直織君。
Naoto still hadn't told Inui his name.
そう固くなることはない。黒谷委員には今回世話になっているからね。
お言葉ですが、あなたがうちに来たことはないはずですが。
君の父上から聞いただけだよ。
Naori had no comeback for that, knowing his father had gone to examine Sachiko Kawase's body after Nanako had found it.
聞きたいこととは何ですか？
黒谷医院に勤めている看護婦。
沢城七子。
Naori answered even though he knew it was a leading question.
ああ、そうだ。彼女が祭りの日に何をしていたか知らないかね。
さあ、彼女は祖父と父の病院の従業員ですから。
Simply saying he didn't know would have left a bitter taste in his mouth, so Naori intentionally replied aggressively.
そうかね。
And yet Inui ended his interrogation without so much as a fight. No, perhaps it hadn't even been an interrogation at all. Felt more like he simply asked on a whim since the opportunity had posed itself.
では失礼させてもらう。その建物には入るなよ。
Inui glanced at the group after firing off that warning.
男女7歳にして席を同じゅうせずとあるのだから、せめて手をつなぐ程度に抑えておけよ。
Inui departed, leaving a clearly flustered Ayato behind.
どうしましたか？
Stupid. Sasuke cocked her head curiously.
何かあったのか？
Naori joined in on the prying.
いや、何もないけど。
それのどこが何もないやつのうろたえ方だよ。
Ultimately, Naori decided to pursue that line of questioning no further, figuring that it'd just lead to one major headache of a conversation from the way Satsuki was acting. Yu was cleaning the exterior of the inn as per her daily routine. The police had finally pulled out of Hitogata, leaving the settlement with the quietest morning it had had in what felt like an eternity. And again, no one could remember the last time the inn ever had so many guests either. Yu had been busy as a bee helping her grandmother that whole time, which had kept her away from her friends. Though that was inevitable, seeing as how those two were the only ones working the inn. Yu went back inside, and when she'd finished sweeping the snow all those investigators had haphazardly kicked out about as they'd left.
Yuya?
Yoshie, her grandmother, called out as soon as she saw her.
何おばあちゃん。
少し休憩しようかね。
A tray of tea and steamed buns sat beside Yoshie.
そうね。
Yu took a seat on the raised floor near the shoe rack by the inn's front door.
それにしてもまあ、ヒンナ様のたたりでこんなに騒ぎになるとはね。
Yoshie casually referenced the recent state of the inn as she drank some hot tea.
昔は騒ぎにならなかったの。
Yu was perplexed, believing a commotion of that level to be only natural for a homicide.
いや、最初は騒ぎになるさ。でも、ヒンナ様のたたりだとわかるとみんな黙るんだわ。
たたりを恐れて。
そうかもしれんな。そもそもたたりを受けるんは悪いことしたやつだと
Okay,
決
then
まってる
riddle
ん
me
で
this,
な。
Yoshie. What was Kawase's sin? I'd love to know. Yoshie continued sipping her tea.
殺された人は悪いことをしていたのかしら。
ヒンナ様を勝手に祀るんは悪いことじゃよ。願いを叶えようと周りを出し抜いたんじゃからな。
でも偽物のヒンナ様を祀るとたたりがあるのは
そんだけ叶えたい願いがあったんだろうさ。
You pondered the matter, but ultimately couldn't conceive what sort of wish one would be willing to risk their life over. Inui perused a collection of documents pertaining to Sachiko Kawase. She'd been prone to illness and had exhibited difficulty conceiving following her marriage. Ah. So is that how they select their targets then? Because they said that Kawase had medical problems, but now that we hear from Yoshie about like, it's more so about like desperation. Like clearly there was something she was desperate for, something she truly wanted. So they're like, so if they have this really strong desire, it's more likely to be able to assume that they were so desperate that they'd resort to a fake worship or worshipping a fake Hina, right? So I think it still would require inside information from the doctor, right? Who's also, that makes sense, who's also like the local therapist, right? He studied, mental medicine or whatever it is, psychological, whatever the fuck, psychology. So the powers that be get a hold of Mr. Kuroya, right? And they talk about, like, are there any patients that you have that would have a strong sense of desperation for something? Like, oh, I don't know, a woman who's, essentially been labeled infertile, but wants to have children, right? Like, oh, well, that sounds like someone desperate for something, right? Sachiko had been receiving infertility treatment when all of a sudden her husband passed away in an accident. Her health, as if compounded by the resulting grief, fell into a downward spiral shortly thereafter. Not only had she rarely interacted with her fellow villagers, if ever, she also spent most of her days over the last few years sick in bed. Or honestly, it could just be desperation to get better. It's less so about being old and at their end of their life, because honestly, that's kind of what I assumed it had been when I heard that there had been, like, medical issues, but judging from the CGs, Miss Kawase looks fairly young, middle age at best. So I'm guessing it's more so just, like, out of desperation for her health to improve. At least that's the reason the cursed truthers want to pin on it, right? Inui had scrutinized the documents from cover to cover more times than he could ever hope to count. However, nothing in them remotely hinted at a potential motive for homicide. The only thing that caught Inui's eye was her husband's death, but a subsequent investigation into the incident revealed there had been little to no chance of any foul play. Thus, though he loathed doing so, he decided to consider the case from the angle of the curse of Lord Hina. Inui wasn't a believer in the supernatural, not even in the slightest. He knew that every case out there, no matter how aberrant a surface it may have possessed, had a human pulling the strings from behind the curtain. Aberrant. I think that's how you pronounce that, aberrant. As such, the idea that a deity had cursed someone to death in a fit of divine wrath was utterly preposterous to him. Sachiko Kawase had most certainly been murdered, and by a fellow human, no less. That being said, the term curse still had its roots deep in the case. The reason she'd been cursed was certainly because someone had wanted her dead. Another human had cursed and killed her for no reason. And that reason was...
Hinna-sama ka.
Inui ruminated over the clay doll that had been in the victim's abdomen. That piece of evidence had been brought back to HQ when the other investigators left. And so, he only had a report on the item in question with a black and white photograph attached to reference. According to legends, worshipping a counterfeit Lord Hina was what invoked his curse to begin with. Inui had no means with which to verify the authenticity of the clay doll. However, the mere fact that Sachiko Kawase had been cursed naturally led one to assume it was fake. Or perhaps the one enshrined in the Hinagami estate was the only one that could be considered real. If so, then perhaps it was the place where it was worshipped, not the doll itself, that was the deciding factor. The Hinagamis were the only ones who could worship the real Lord Hina and partake in his blessings. It was still too early for him to start pointing fingers. Figuring out why Sachiko Kawase would be worshipping Lord Hina came first. It was a reasonable assumption, but what sort of wish could drive a person to such lengths? To make a full recovery? No, too simple. I'll go fuck myself then. The resurrection of her husband then? No, that's absurd. There's no snowball's chance in hell that that would come true. And again, curses themselves are also absurd. Perhaps wanting something unrealistic in the first place is exactly why people wish for them. Inui chided himself for indulging in such fantasies and had a sip of tea. Tasted as frigid as a block of ice.